Welcome back to the World of Martial Arts show. I'm here with my co-hosts, Kurt and Mick. And as coaches and teaching in the gym, we use a lot of strange terms, some foreign words, some names for techniques that we come up with ourselves. And we kind of wanted to have a chat about that and the language we use within the gym. So, Mick, have you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have. I'm a huge fan of using traditional terminology. I have to be serious to start off with because I'll just go on my stupid tangents anyway. But Rick Fay is a great believer, and Guru Danino Santo is also a great believer in understanding the history behind the terminology, because they always say, first of all, that it lends some credence to not just yourself teaching it, but the art itself, and then the cultural appreciation and stuff like that. And with me personally, I was always into it anyway from my karate days, because Don Arigato Gozaimashita, thanks a lot, mate. See you next week. Don Arigato Gozaimashita sounds way better, And then obviously, let me see, Toby Maigari, jumping front kick sounds ace. But Gakazuki was my favorite. Yeah, if you ever went to a competition, the only advice you ever got was gag him, and like everyone else is like, what is that? What's that even mean? Gakazuki. Yeah,
Mick, what is it about that kind of term that, like, why do you like it? You know what I mean? Is it just because it sounds fun? It kind of adds something to it? Because it's funny watching you start to slip into those terms, you start to light up, right?
I love it.
Those are old terms for you, so I'm curious what it is that still keeps you firing.
Well, if you think about it this way, Kurt, I'm going to break it to anyone who's listening to this, who's gone into martial arts with any sort of prissy ideas about why they went into martial arts. You went into martial arts to escape the boring, humdrum suburban life that you had. And what's better than living in Coventry in the 1980s with an Irish accent, getting the shit kicked out of you, then wait a minute, I'll learn Japanese and I'll learn how to beat people up in Japanese. And you're like, oh, this is going to be ace. So of course, it just made it a little bit more exotic. That's the whole thing. And again, there's a bit of intellectual and moral superiority behind it, where you go, oh, just sidekick him. You went, don't you mean Yokogari? Shoot down him, my friend. And it's just that sort of shit. It's like, I really, really like it because first of all, you're paying homage to where you've come from, but also it shows that that it's not just a middle sidekick. Nathan, what were you going to say, mate?
So I was exactly the same. If you're about to do some sparring, it's much better if they go Hajime before, but then you start doing it with the accent and you start saying these things. And I'm worried that I'm being racist. And I'm worried that I'm saying the words wrong. Like, that's the thing as well. I've looked videos online. Often we're using it wrong. I mean, does that matter? I mean, I remember Dave Turton saying to me once that, a lot of martial arts, traditional martial arts, they're just historical recreation societies. That's all they are. And that's fine if you know that's what it is. But when we're dressing in the gi because that's kind of what someone wore in the paddy fields or something like that, and we're saying things with a bit of a Japanese accent, I've always been felt a little bit uncomfortable. When I was a kid, I loved it. I had Japanese calligraphy on my wall, walking around in Zori sandals, you know what I mean? Like, I loved all that shit. But now, as an adult, as someone who's been around it a long time, I don't feel as comfortable with it. I don't know, like, how do you feel about, like, are we being respectful to these the origin countries of our arts if we're actually saying the stuff wrong and using it wrong? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. Like, I mean, I came of age in the 90s, so like the rest of us, I have some Asian writing tattooed on my body, and inevitably, at least if you were living in the States, that's something most of us didn't get out of the 90s without. And so, like, I always liked well, here's the problem. It was like an aesthetic here, like, right? It was like a way to like a genre of style or something like that. And in times that might be interesting, but I feel like now in 2021, we've got a lot of perspective about the way that's perceived by people from those communities. So in the broad strokes, big picture of the thing, I think it really depends on the individual and the intention and the way they're going about it. The thing that always gets me is exactly what you're talking about. Why, and mostly I see it with Japanese martial arts schools, is there the accent. And I don't know enough about Japanese language to know if that intonation is actually part of it, in the same way that, like, when I hear people do a stereotype of an Italian accent, I'm like, it's closer to true than it is to untrue, right? It's closer to accurate than it is to not, because that intonation matters. It's part of the language. But it just seems weird to me. Like when we were in Japan, Mick, I didn't see everybody walking around town. They're just having conversations like we are. They had all kinds of different voices, And so the idea that once we're on the mat, all of a sudden there's this sort of intonation and accent makes me uncomfortable. But I do think it's probably not unlike the way that people, when they're like English speakers, at least in America, will default into a drill sergeant kind of tone, right? And all of a sudden it's like they're in the Marine Corps or something. Like I wasn't in the military. That's not part of my background. Why all of a sudden when people are doing push-ups, do I sound like I'm in Full Metal Jacket or something? That doesn't translate to me. So I don't know if it's the mat or the culture itself. Mick, what do you think?
Well, first of all, it's not just the domain of the Japanese. I was watching Nathan on camera there when you said Japanese, and it was literally like there was this disturbance in the force between the two of us, because we both thought at the same time, no, we know loads of guys who speak with a Brazilian Portuguese accent.
Yes, I've been reminded that's very much become a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. You see, this is the thing. It's like, my friend, we do that omoplata, and you're like, whoa, wait, you're from Birmingham, man. Why are you talking like that? But again, it's like maybe that's how they learned it. Second generation guys, we got no excuse. That's the thing. We have no excuse at all. Yes,
I'm going to interject though, because how is that? That's not how you learned it. If you learned like the name of the technique with an accent, that I get. You know what I mean? Like, so you're sort of, there's an intonation in the way that you're going to say that, because you're trying to use the correct pronunciation. But if you're walking around your gym barefoot with some Brazilian accent and you're from Cleveland, Ohio or whatever, you didn't learn that. You know what I mean? You watch the YouTube videos too many times and you start to, it's like when my kids watch that cartoon Peppa Pig, all of a sudden they sound like you guys. They're talking with English accents. Fine. I get it. But
the old aristocratic pig has made it over to your neck of the woods, has it?
Oh, yeah? It's very much a thing.
Oh, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. Again, it boils down to the escapism. A rainy Tuesday morning in Warsaw or Copacabana Beach, which one are you going to pick? You're going to pick that. And as I said, with the terminology I think is literally, that's like a gateway drug into losing your mind when it comes to martial arts. As soon as I see people, first of all, use that, I know they're going down a deep hole. It's almost like it's like the martial arts equivalent of going on YouTube to watch Peppa Pig or Baby Shark. And the next thing you know, boom, you're falling into something you just don't want to be in. Nathan, what are you thinking?
I think that's definitely, yeah, you're right there. That is a sign when someone starts using certain terms. You're like, oh, okay, he's on board. Like, you've sold him on that. And maybe it's one of the ways we do sell it to people. Like Kurt, you mentioned like the way you learn a move. Do you feel an obligation to use the names of techniques that the instructors that taught it to you used, or are you happy to change it within your own gym that's maybe going to suit like your students?
That's a good question. I think I probably default to how it was taught to me. Right. So if person X taught it to me and they use this term, that's the one that I use, especially because a lot of the stuff we all learn might have 10, 12 different names, not just like in English and original language translation, but like with Filipino martial arts, there's, every group has a different name for the same technique. And then every group might use the same name to mean different techniques. So it's all really contextual in that way. I do think it's completely okay to prioritize what works best if you're a teacher, what works best for your students, for the culture and the community that your school is in. One thing, Mick and I share a teacher who always says, he respects and appreciates the terms. He doesn't use a lot of the foreign language terms all the time And he'll say, like, we didn't speak a lot of Filipino, like Tagalog, in my house growing up because he's a white guy from Midwest America. You know what I mean? And so I appreciate that perspective where he's going, that's not my language. I don't want to do this wrong. I don't want to, and I don't want to speak for him, but, you know, I'm not trying to misrepresent or potentially play around with, you know, misappropriation, some of that stuff. It's just, this is what the technique is called. That's good enough. Can you do it? Do you care about the art? Do you care about teaching and learning? That's the deal. For me, we use the terms a lot in my school because I love the terms. I'm a nerd for it. I always have been, apart from the weird accent thing, which is also kind of fun. But I always think that it adds all kinds of layers to it. It's the stuff I was attracted to before I ever started training. Was it just the kind of poetry of language that it has, and that adds different elements to the training, certain qualities to it that appeal to me.
I like what you said about some moves have lots of different names. I never know quite how to tackle that. I've actually used it to sell a move to people before. So when I'm teaching, I'm trying to sell the move to people. And sometimes I've said, you know, there's a lock, like a key lock, when you've got someone's arm bent, and it's got so many different names, from like catch wrestling, udigurami in judo and different things. You know, people call it a V arm lock and a coil arm lock and different things. And sometimes I use that fact that it's got a lot of names to go, well, that means it's in a lot of arts, which means it's probably a legitimate technique. And sometimes I've played around using different terms just to see what sticks with different people.
Yeah, and for that reason, I really like it, or for both those reasons, because things are going to resonate differently for people. Anytime you can be analogous when you're teaching, I think is a really good thing, a good hack. It helps people connect dots when there's some sort of analogy. And when you're going as a type of analogy, you know, this is called this kind of lock because it looks like this, they'll remember that forever. Excuse me, if that's how their brain works. You know what I mean? If there's a visual component to the way that to their thought process, that'll stay with them for a long time. I also think as a coach, even the hypothetical thing you just ran through, they call it this in catch wrestling, they call it this and this in judo. It also makes me go, man, Nathan's kind of a stud because he knows all of the different variations from all these different arts. So if I'm a student on the mat with you, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. You know, I appreciate that it comes from all these sources, but the guy here seems to really know his stuff. And I think that's got value.
Yeah, but then, Kurt, that brings us straight back to what we were saying about it lends credence to it. What I also, you know, Nathan was saying, where it comes to remembering stuff, I personally, my brain works is when I hear armbar, I think it's literally, it's armbar, belly down armbar. And so there's only two arm bars. But then when you start thinking about it, and there's so many different ways to set it up. And then when you say, I actually like the term Jujutsu. I really like that because first of all, you know, armbar is something that, because it's English, I won't really remember it, but I have to spend the time to do it. And then with me personally, I immediately, when I think Jujutsu, I think two things. Rick Young and Neil Adams, and my brain immediately goes to a clip of watching both of those guys pull off what I think in perfection is probably what an armbar should. That in my brain, you know that meme where it's like what my mom thinks I do, what I think I do, what I really do. Yeah, so I'm really doing this awful thing where in my brain I think that I'm pulling off a Neil Adams. Nathan,
I didn't even think about like who you associate it with. Because I was actually going to say about, I remember someone talking about Kung Fu once and saying that the evocative names, you know, like if you say Tiger Claw, you know exactly what you kind of mean. If you know, all the descriptions of different hand positions and how they do stuff, and you know, Drunken Monkey, like again, it's using English terms, but it's very descriptive and evocative, so you can almost kind of imagine what it is. But when you use a foreign term, you don't get that. But then you do get that added thing of, oh yeah, like if you think Jujutsu, you think Neil Adams, and you've seen Neil Adams do it, and you've seen Neil Adams, you know, call it that, and then you've seen him do it, and you kind of connect those things together, and you kind of want to model and be like him, you know.
Well, you know, again, this is a, you know, I don't want to lower the tone, but you know, this whole situation where you were saying about it being evocative, it's one of my personal favorites. Whenever you know, I did it last night. I was doing a bit of stick work and I was literally doing it 5 angles, Kurt. So I was doing some Abecedario, And then I was saying for training, we do the angle 1, the angle 2, and it's all adults in the class. So I'm going, that's the carotid artery, and that's the carotid artery. And then 3 and 4, we go across the body, so with the stick. And then 5 is, as Bob Breen always says, angle 5, that's the angle you don't want when you're in jail. So I always laugh at that one because that's really, really amusing. But what I was doing was I pointed out to the guys about how the 3 and the 4 cutting the femoral artery. And, you know, as I did it, I, you know, been a bit of time off work without training the partner. So I sort of hit my uke, Paul Devlin, I hit him a little bit. And he went, ow! And I, first of all, I congratulated him because I said, if I hit that low, you got a very, very lucky wife. That was the first thing. But the second point that I put was I didn't realize I was going to be teaching monkey steals the peach. So it's one of my favorite techniques in Kung Fu, because the minute you hear that, it's like, oh, so that's just a nut shot, right? But, you know, if you turn around and say, I'm going to teach you all monkey steals the peach, you go, oh, that sounds amazing. I'm going to teach you how to punch another guy in the nuts. Effective maybe, but not as romantic. Well, I don't want to use the term romantic. Jesus, just talked about angle 5s in the prison shower and monkey stealing peaches. But you know what I mean? It's more evocative, Kurt.
But that, just the fact that you got to give us that whole explanation is exactly why, you know, some looseness with the terms can be fun.
Yeah,
because if monkey steals the peach is a traditional term, I don't know, it kind of sounds like I'm not sure, I don't know how old that is or something, but it sticks out in your head. Any of those associations, I think, that help you remember the details, like you guys are talking about, the way it makes you think of the individual the term's connected to. That's a great opportunity as coaches for us to be able to build those little modeling hacks for our students in their mind.
Well, the thing is, the monkey steals the peach. I don't even know. I've got a sneaky feeling I might have made it up. I have no idea. I probably watched.
No, but I mean, that's been around for. There's a YouTube channel called Monkey.
Oh, wicked!
That's an old kung fu thing, and that's great. Like, Nathan, this is something I was curious to ask you, because I know with combat sports and more contemporary, if we use that term for combat sports in that way, there's some differences in culture, maybe around some of the terms and the way that you would use them as a coach in a fight too, as a coach in the ring. Some of these things, to me, you know, you get like something called tiger claw, and it has a traditional Chinese language name for it, and that might be very, very old, right? Potentially this could be from, I don't know, Shaolin Temple or something like that, you know, whereas other ones are just made by somebody, and maybe it has their name, maybe it doesn't. On a long enough timeline, we lose the origin of the term anyways. And I'm curious if that influences you guys in the way you prioritize the term, you know, because if we're going, look, the guy who first created this thing called it tiger claw, that's what you should call it. I mean, we don't know that story, and we certainly don't know that with jab or cross or every other technique that we think of.
I do find, because of having worked within MMA and just combat sports generally, you're picking from so many different places. It sometimes feels a bit weird to say, you know, you're doing something from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with a Portuguese term, and there's something from boxing, there's something from Thai boxing. So we do tend to westernize a lot of it and standardize it across, just because it's easier. It just sounds a bit strange. You know, you start jumping around saying, you know, like a teep into a double leg, you know, into a Jujigatami, and it's too much of a mix. It's too much of a mixing pot. So I do find we tend to simplify it. But often, you know, within combat sports, a lot of moves, there's always innovation. Things are always getting named after people. There's like the Von Flu choke and the Darsh choke. You know, these are after fighters. They're fighters who made these moves popular. And a lot of gyms name stuff their own way, so that when they're cornering and they're shouting things out, then their opponent won't know what it is. I mean, 10th Planet are really known for that. That's their big thing.
Well, it's funny, just as you were saying this, it would be remiss of me not to add this. I remember being on a seminar once I'm convinced it was in Barcelona, and Guru Dan Santo was there, and I walked up and I was wearing, I've got, you know, far too many t-shirts with jiu-jitsu or combat sports written all over them, and I was wearing this t-shirt and it had on it jiu-jitsu and then this glossary of terms, and one of them was De La Riva, and Guru Dan came up to me and he said, He goes, Mike, there's a great story about that. And as I said before, he calls me Mike, man. The guy knew Bruce Lee, and he almost gets my name right. For a plasterer from Coventry, that's a total win in my book, right? But he came up and he said, Mike, you see this? He said, the De La Riva guard. He said, Carlson Gracie came up to me and he said, no, we call that the Jello guard. He said, that's our Jello guard. He stole that from us. And I said, what did you do, Guru? And Guru was like, it was Carlson Gracie. I just agreed with him. And like, I just thought it was an absolutely great line, because that just proved like this is the greatest martial artist of our lifetime. And he probably would know 15 different other variations of what that would be called. But yeah, it's very interesting where some people have taken ownership, and, you know, again, fair play. Yeah, Nathan.
So, well, one of the big things with terms is, what do you call the instructor? Are you happy with Sensei, Sifu, Professor, Guru, any of these terms? In my gym, I don't like any of them. I don't really allow any of them. I just call me Nathan. Like, that's my name. Like, I'm from the suburbs in Leicester. Like, calling me anything other than that just feels strange. There's no bowing. There's nothing like that. You know, sometimes I'll call myself an instructor or a coach or a teacher, you know, all Western terms, but I would never personally go to those other arts. But I don't really have the qualifications in some of those to do it. So what about you guys?
Nathan, I have a question for you then about that, since you're starting it out, because I think a great topic. You said two things. So no bowing or anything. Do you guys have any sort of like DAP or some sort of, you know?
Well, not right now, nothing. But
yeah, okay, interesting.
Normally, it's like a a slap of the hands and a bump of the fist.
Yeah, okay,
or just a touch of gloves or something
Sure.
like that.
Right.
But something again very westernized.
Cool. And then you said instructor, coach, teacher as three examples of Western terms. Do you think there's a difference between those three things, without getting too deep into the layers of that, because that's a whole other conversation regarding the significance of terminology? Do you think those are kind of fluid use for you, or do you have different hats for those things?
Yes, they are different. And yes, I agree. That's a whole nother conversation.
Cool.
Stay
tuned to future episodes of the World of Martial Arts Show.
I would just like to add one thing. Whenever I see any of this, one of my classic lines is, I can lay claim to about 6 different titles if I wanted to. There's only one that I'll go for. 3. Oh, thank you, Nathan. No, I'm only joking. But as I said before, the one thing that I will do is, even my wife will have to call me professor when I get my black belt at Jiu-Jitsu, because everything else I sort of got grandfathered in a way. Well, maybe not so much, but I worked at it. But as I've got older, I've really had to earn that. But the one thing I would say about that, and we will touch on it another time, is my biggest take on all of this is, anybody who wants to be called a grandmaster immediately in my book is not a grandmaster, because you can call me anything you want, because it doesn't matter to me, because I know what I am. So yeah, I want to put the hat on that one straight away. But I've just been looking through my notes, boys, and if you don't mind, Nathan, have you ever, I want to just ask you, when you've been coaching, have you ever used any slang or any sort of terminology that no one would understand? Only because I'm going through my notes here and I'm looking at the Frankenstein, which was one of Eric Paulson's, where he used to say, if you ever had a guy who didn't really have much talent and he had to get to grips quick, instead of saying clinch, he just used to get them to do the Bela Lugosi. So just do the Frankenstein straight around their neck.
We use Frankenstein here too.
So I would actually like to hear what terms you do use. Like, I would like to know, do you call yourselves Guru? Do you call yourself Sensei? Like, what do people call you at your gym? Like, I don't know what people do at other gyms. Like, but
I think that's a good question. We usually like grand inheritor of the lineage and the art is usually what we use. Something like
something nice and short.
Yes, right.
Rolls off the top.
Yeah, most of the time, it's interesting though. This is why I like this topic. Is my primary instructor, we just always used his first name up until very, very recently, and now we use titles with him because we've kind of forced that on him. And so that's the tradition I came up in. I like that aspect. I like that It has more of a gym and a group dynamic, a club feel that way. It's a little more accessible. That lack of traditional hierarchy that exists in more modern schools has always appealed to me as a person. The older I get, the more I sort of am going the other direction and starting to crave more of that tradition. And I like to use the terms, I'll put it this way, like I like to use the terms as a student. I don't like to use the terms as a teacher, and I don't like to use the terms, and maybe this is my ego, when I'm talking to other teachers. Right. So, like, I met a guy outside of his karate school once here. And one time I went past this place. We had never met. He didn't know who I was. I went past this place just to drop in and check it out. I had just moved to the area. And I got there before they opened. He was the first guy in the parking lot. And he introduced himself to a stranger as Sheehan Steve. Right. And I'm like, what if I was just like here to read the meter, the gas meter or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, it was so clearly the foot he put forward all the time. This is like people that use their terms as part of their Facebook like name, even though you can tell it's not like just for their students or whatever. It's not just an internal thing. That kind of stuff, it just, I don't know, it makes me kind of cringe about it a little bit. I don't know why. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It just, it makes me uncomfortable, and I wouldn't use that. So in my gym, people just call me by my name. Couple people call me Guru or Sifu because they chose to, and that's part of the deal for them. A couple people call me Coach because they choose to. That's kind of part of the deal for them. And that's something that I learned here, especially in the town where I live. There's a lot of traditional martial artists where when I'm like, you just call me Kurt, they immediately grimace like, I don't know about this guy, man. He must not really care. You know, Mick, have you, I see you shaking your head, nodding your head to that. Do you have anything similar? Coventry and Detroit are oddly kind of similar in some of our vibe and tone. I wonder if that's been something you've seen.
Bro, this is why I said to you from day one, this is why me
Right.
and you had an affinity. Yeah, Coventry's the Motown of the UK. We had the car industry,
Right.
we had music. You had way better music than us, by the way. All we sang about was how shit our city was. At least you guys had a bit of a vibe going on there and some cool dancing. But yeah, it's very, very strange. I have a couple of guys who call me Sifu. A couple of guys call me Guru. Not too comfortable with either of those two, to tell you the truth. Yeah, Coach, I can deal with. When it's kids, I get them to call me coach or boss. Sometimes I like boss anyway because it just puts that seed into their head that while mixing here, he runs the show a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those. It's like I really dislike anybody who wants that to be. Again, it's part of their identity. I've got a really dear friend of mine, and he's a lovely bloke. But when he's in the pub, he has his students call him Sensei in the pub. And I'm looking at them going, really? Come on, man. We're like, there's no way I'll do that. But this is the mad thing. I call Dev Barrett Sensei Dev because he's a 68-year-old man who was a world champion. I rent his gym off him, and I truly respect the guy. So I know that makes me sound like a right hypocrite but I'm doing it because I really respect the guy. Yeah, and we don't have the relationship to call him Dev, and we have because we're really good friends. But there's a lineage there's a hierarchy there. That's the one. And I'm not old enough yet to be that. Nathan, what's your views?
Oh, we've all met some of these Sheehan Steves and pub senseis. They're the kind of guys who get married in their gi, usually to one of their students. Like that's
Oops.
Yeah, we've all seen those. But I was just thinking probably the only time I
That's
used
to me, I'm sorry, that's the funniest moment of the show so far. That's the most accurate thing. I'm dying.
100%.
I was just thinking one of the times I ever use sir is if I'm at a seminar. If John Will or someone was teaching, I'm not going to call him Sensei. I'm not going to call him Sifu. I'm not going to call him Professor. But I'll definitely call him Sir. Like I won't just go, all right, John. Like I do feel that you do have to find a way to show respect to the people that you do respect.
Yeah, and I think sir, sir is one of those things. I just was kind of raised that way. Like I'll call most people if you're a guy and just out bumping you, walking past you on the sidewalk. That's just kind of how I was raised to talk to people, sir, ma'am, whatever. It's not even politeness as much as, I don't know. It's just, this is kind of how you communicate with people. And so I've always been in the habit of that. And it's so rare that you get somebody who goes, I see you calling me sir, but really it's sensei. And I've had that happen before. And I think more than once. And I think only with sensei as a term. And, right away to me, that's like, I'm probably not going to come back, because it just makes me think you're here for specific reasons that don't really match anything that I'm interested right now. Mick, you're talking about not liking somebody who like anoints themselves grandmaster. And there's a quote that I love. I have it up on the wall, and I have the quote. I actually first saw it in a meme from Edgar Salite, who's a Filipino martial art legend that passed away some time ago. But you might be able to attribute it to someone else as well. But it's something to the effect of a master is only ever called a master by other masters, never by himself. That I like, and the idea that it's like, look, I'm going to call you this, like Mick, you're saying that the gentleman that you call Sifu or whoever, I have that with David Hatch here in town. Right. So David was my first JKD teacher, and everyone here in Detroit that knows him, he's sort of the representation, the overarching, the Inasano method godfather for this part of the country, right? For this part of especially for Michigan. And so I call him Sifu Dave because everybody calls him Sifu Dave. I don't actually think of him as my Sifu. I think of Rick Fay as my Sifu in the way that that term has meaning. Rick won't let me call him that, but but I make my students call him that. And that's another thing then, like Mick, I'm curious to get your take on your fluidity with these terms because you have all these terms that would apply to you. Maybe you don't make your students do that. But if Dan Inasano, if Rick Fay, if whoever was there, do you have rules in how that etiquette might be different for the person higher than you?
100%. It's pretty much a litmus test that I have for when I speak to people. If we ever mention anything to do with Guru and Asanto, it's always, if I ever hear anyone say Dan, I immediately go, first of all, you've never met him, or you've met him so many times that guess what? You're his mate, because there is no way, that you should be there. And with Rick, we always call Rick Guru Rick. I call him Sifu, and this is could be a good time to enter into this, because myself and Rick Fay had a conversation once, because I called him Sifu, and I was like, but that's the term, isn't it? And it was after I'd put together a UK tour for him, and we'd actually gone out for a couple of beers because he had two nights free. So I just took him around and showed him Stratford-upon-Avon and places like that. And I called him Sifu, and he sat me down and he goes, "Do you actually know what this means?" He goes, "Because everyone thinks," he goes, "because I find it very amusing that people say this." And he said, "If you want to call me Sifu, Mick," he goes, "I would be honoured that you would call me Sifu." But he said that, there's a weight to this. And I was like, what do you mean a weight? And he said, well, basically it's sort of like anything that you do now from now on directly will be reflected by me, and vice versa. He says it's like this symbiotic relationship now, where it's like I'm your Sifu, which is like an older brother type figure. But the crack is, if you do anything to embarrass yourself, you're embarrassing me. Do you know what that means, Mick? And I was like, yeah, that means I don't do anything to embarrass you anymore. And he goes, or don't get caught, that sort of thing, so because Rick's caught me a few times and said to me, he goes, I love you, Mick, but that online stuff that you're always up to, why do you wind people up so much? And I'm like, because it's easy. And the other thing is, it's like Ferris Bueller, it's like, I have to do it. I see somebody who takes themselves that importantly, I have to go, listen, man, I can't have that. So that was the point where I was like, we've just had a conversation. This got nothing to do with martial arts. This is literally, we're actually, this makes our friendship bond or our relationship so much deeper. So with me, you call Guru Rick, you call Guru Dan. And guess what? You realize who those guys are. The best one the best thing when it comes to titles I've ever heard was literally when I went in to do a seminar with Ajahn Chai, And when I went in there, the first thing they said was, "You can do anything you want in there, Mick, but if you dare call him anything but sir, you will find out how much that guy puts like the weight into this term." And I was like, and one guy turned around to him and he did call him sir. Whack, focus bit straight around the back of the head. He goes, "We call everyone's here, sir." And because he like he'll call you sir all the time. You get like most of the time when he walks past me, he goes, "You are terrible, sir. You look terrible, sir. You hit like my sister, sir." And I'm like, your sister must be pretty tough then. I don't try. No, I don't actually say that, but you understand where I'm coming from. So yeah, I do believe that these terms, there's some real weight to them. But then again, unfortunately, it's like when you throw it around, it loses a bit of weight. I don't know. What do you think, Nathan?
So that's my students to call me Nathan. I've been called a lot worse, I think. So
That's the joke I use.
yeah. I mean, I always say, look, if someone, I mean, people have come in. Usually, the person who comes in on the first session and calls you Sifu, there's some strange guy in like a Game of Death head to toe outfit or some weird thing, who's just watched a lot of movies and wants to come in, and that's fine. But I would rather people didn't do that, because again, like I just said, I'm a Western guy. I've lived in England all my life. To call me some term from another martial art from another country just seems strange.
So we've been talking about different terminology that we see throughout martial arts, maybe from different countries, from different historical regions or periods of time. Some of them are fun and they're modern. Some of them are really detailed and paint a picture about what the technique is supposed to be or where it comes from. I'm wondering if there's any favorite techniques, favorite names for techniques that we can share. Mick, is there any that pop into your head? I know we both have Eric Paulson as a shared coach, who for me is sort of the king of hilarious terms. I've got a couple of his written down. There's any that jump out to you?
So, well, for me, I've taken one from Vunak, from Sifu Paul Vunak, which is the shake and bake, which I just love, because
that's the first one on my list too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's straight in there, because you say it and everyone goes, "Oh, that sounds really good," and you go, "Not really. I'm going to give you like concussion here." So basically, yeah, it's in the clinch and you throw the head around and stuff, and I really like it because, with the way that Paul Vunak sells it, is goes, "Yeah, you do the shake and bake and then you do the rally," and you go, "Oh, the rally, this sounds interesting." So the rally then is the shake and bake, and each time the head comes in, you chun choy him in the head, and then you elbow him, and then you switch to the other side, and you go, and you're like, "That's brutal, but it sounds really cool." So of course, I was teaching that. That's one of my go-tos. That one, and beating someone up with their own arm, where I do the parry and bridge and the gaji and stuff, which I really like. But I like doing the shake and bake, and then I always do the bad breastfeeder, and people go, "What's that?" And I said, just like imagine, the hand that rocks the cradle. Remember that movie, yeah? So shake and bake, shake and bake. And then what I do is I just whack them as hard as their head straight into the pectoral, boom, like that. Ah, God, mate, that almost hurt me. But I really like that. So as I'm doing it, I do shake and bake, baby, shake and bake, rally. Whoa, who hates mommy? Boom, like that, and then throw it straight in there. And I absolutely love it, because then everyone's like, "You don't take this seriously." And I go, "No." And ironically, I'm way better than you. That's what I like about martial arts.
I should have just actually asked you to start creating or tell us terms you've created, because bad best breastfeeder is hilarious. I immediately knew what you meant too.
Yeah,
but that's the part that I love about this, is as ridiculous as that is, right away I was like, oh, I know what I could picture the whole scenario just based on that, because it's descriptive in a certain way. It's contextual, but that's what works about it. I really like in Ghost, they have a piece of footwork called Michael Jackson. We do a piece of footwork in my gym called Van Halen, which is just basically based on the logo and the look of the logo. When you double it up, it looks like the Wonder Woman logo. So we used to use that with the kids program. We call it Wonder Woman. They do certain footwork. We call out Superman. They do one that looks kind of like the Superman logo. And so I like that kind of thing. That helps, like in the case of the kids, it helps them actually picture this and get their body to do it, instead of female triangle or something, which is a common Filipino martial art term, and they're not really going to have context for that. But
I've definitely had different levels of success with things that I've said. I remember at a seminar once I was teaching a whole sequence where you're behind someone who's turtled up, like in a referee's position, and you're breaking them down and getting them face down and riding them from there. And I told the class it was prison jujitsu, and it just deathly silence. Although one person came up afterwards and said that was amazing. Why did no one laugh? And then we had Dean Lister come up, and he was teaching a footlock. And when you wrap the footlock, you bring the hand nice and high, and he said to bring it right up to your chest like this. And I told him, oh, just call it second base. Like, you know, you reach and you grab there. And then I saw a video of him teaching a seminar in another country, and he goes, oh, this is called second base. And I was like, I fucking named that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, some of those names were just amazing, weren't they?
We use Eric Paulson's. We use Meat Helmet, and we use just for balling up, which I really like. We use what was another one I was just thinking of? I don't know. I'll have to come back to
the Melon Crusher. Melon Crusher's a favorite.
Oh, you know what? I just remembered
KADOINK.
The KADOINK. Yeah, the KADOINK is that's just a fun word to say. Like you guys kept talking about Jujutsu, right?
Yes.
And Mick, you had said, I just like that one. That's just fun to say. Every time you guys say it, I'm like, yeah, I get why we're using terms. KADOINK is one of those. It's hilarious. And he's talking about just like a vertical hammer fist right to your head. Don't, right?
Yeah.
Right
well,
down on the top of the dome. KADOINK is hilarious.
Well, it was just as you were saying it, Kurt. Yeah, our mutual teacher, Rick Fay, used to teach the hitchhiker armbar escape, because obviously he'd always say when he's teaching grappling, this was back in the early days where nowadays you go up against any kid who's played a bit of UFC, has an idea about grappling, or he's rolled around forward with his friends. But this was back in the days where they didn't realise. And the Rick used to go, right, okay, now to do the escape, you've got to do the Three Stooges walk. And I remember me and you doing it, Kurt. And as we were doing it, he was telling us off because we weren't doing the we weren't doing the Three Stooges like whatever it is. Is it a language? I don't know. What is it? It's just a sound that you guys make, isn't it? You guys. I'm not saying you're a stooge, by the way. I'm just saying like you American characters. You know?
Oh, that's true. That's part of my cultural heritage. The stooge people of yeah. You know, so there's a lot of, we were saying earlier too, like Jujutsu, there's foreign language terms, which is to say I'm an English speaker, so they're foreign to me, that I really like, that maybe as traditional terms for techniques kind of add what my teacher, Fred Biliardi, my Kali Silestrisimo teacher, called a poetry of language. And I thought that was a great way to describe this stuff, because it adds a certain kind of thing to the technique. So two that occurred to me that I thought were kind of cool for that reason is Cadena Real, which we hear a lot in Filipino martial art. And it's a kind of dissolving motion, usually with a blade that goes across the head or across the throat. And Cadena Real means like a royal necklace, a ruby royal necklace, a red necklace. And once you hear that, you realize, okay, we're talking about cutting a throat, and those rubies are the blood coming down from the throat, right? And now all of a sudden you're like, yeah, okay, you clearly have thought about this when you named this technique, right? It wasn't just Steve's backhand motion or whatever. It was, you know, there's something to that I thought was interesting. There's another one they use called pinkies, and I don't think my accent is right on that, but it's like if you had a sword and you're trying to kind of clap together to stall their motion between your blade and your hand. That sandwiching motion of those two things coming together is like sandwich bread. And so pinkies are like what we would call sliders here in the US, like street food, little tiny sandwiches. And again, there's something I'm never going to forget that. I'm going to always remember that technique, because of the idea that, oh, it's a kind of food that I've never seen or been exposed to that is a common street food in another part of the world, which I think is kind of interesting. Mick, do you have a favorite term that comes from a different language, or a traditional term for an art that you think is similar, where it kind of adds a little bit of light onto a technique, and maybe that can bring us home?
Well, for me, it was I'd never ever heard of the term Kembayata. So the Kembayata, where you meet and dissolve and come through. So very similar to what you were saying when we meet the stick. And it was, for me, first of all, it was Terry Barnett was the first person I ever used the term. So literally, I used to hear people say, "You hit and switch, you hit and switch." And I was like, and then he said Kenbiato, and I was like, well, what's that mean, Tel? And he said, well, it's you're meeting the force and you're dissolving it. And the minute he said that, everything, like literally, from not just from the stick work, but even from trapping. And then it makes it sound really poncy when I say this, but I have it in jiu-jitsu now, where I literally will have this thought process where I'll just follow. I'll dissolve what's coming in. And I know that makes me sound like way airy fairy, but it's not. It's what I like about it is I like the fact that one simple little word makes me realize that this oncoming energy is coming. And what I do is I just have to give into it. I give into it and I just ride it. I literally was using it last night where I was teaching the Kenbiata and we were doing a little bit of stick work on the warm-up. And I was explaining to the guys, I said, what I love about this is the fact that in the Western world, we have such a binary mindset. So we all know the thing, oh, it's sink or swim, man, sink or swim in life. And they go, I better not tell those surfers, man, because they seem to be having a fucking great time. And then when you think about it, you go, so and what's surfing? It's you jump on it and go, right, okay, it's my skill level that's going to get me, or I'm going to screw up. And it's that moment where you jump in it, you go, do you know what? Instead of trying to stop it, instead of trying to follow it, guess what? Accept it. And it's just, and I like the mindset behind that. And that
so you've got one term that can encapsulate all of that feeling and all of that thought process that you just described. And instead,
exactly.
You just, boop, here's one thing like that.
Well, that's cool.
Cool.
You see, and then you see, I have that. I use that with my mindset in jiu-jitsu. Sometimes like, this is happening, right? Okay, how do I get out of it? And I use it quite a lot, believe it or not. Nathan Leverton will chastise me for this because at 52 years of age, I shouldn't be scrambling. So my big favorite all the time is, I'll give up the pass and we're gonna scramble, And then it's like you always end up getting to your knees, diving for single legs when they're never there. Like as I said, like I spend more time now reaching for single legs than I do looking for my keys. That's how old I am. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, it's got to be here somewhere, and it's never there. But it's as I said, it's a wonderful term. I think it's a great term. Have you got any terms?
We landed on the fact that terms are fluid. It's contextual. They can be important. They can be of significant impact. But what's the Bruce Lee quote, Mick? The don't focus on the finger pointing at the moon,
or you'll miss all the heavenly glory.